be difficult to believe, I still remember the first time I heard the phrase school shooting. I began my education at a private Catholic school that had multiple daily prayers and weekly in-school masses. The only drills we ran at the time, back then, were fire drills. But when I was in the first grade, that's when it all began to change. A fight was reported at a nearby high school that resulted in a teen boy being shot and killed. In actuality, there was little reason to panic, of course, and the truth is that my classmates and I were too young at the time to fully grasp the situation. However, I do recall the adults having a particularly strong reaction to the incident. Many teachers with memories fresh from the horrific story of Sandy Hook Elementary were reacting to an incident that now was hitting too close to home. We could no longer take comfort in the excuse that would never happen to us, for that's nowhere near here. The same excuses that we use to justify dismissing events like the infamous 1999 Columbine school shooting, because that's all the way in Colorado. But this was only 25 minutes away. The danger was close, too close, an indication that no state or city or school was particularly exempt or safe. Fast forward, I'm in the 4th grade at a different school, and once again, the only drills that we ever ran were fire drills. But that was the year it all began to truly change. The Parkland shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas on Valentine's Day devastated families only an hour away. 17 people were killed. 14 of them were students. And this wasn't some quarrel between students that had escalated. No, this was now mass school shootings. Suddenly, the drills we ran no longer focused on exiting a building in an organized manner. No, now it focused on hiding behind and under desks or standing on top of toilets and bathroom stalls, so if a shooter came looking, they wouldn't see your shoes or feet. We learned to be invisible. Because we knew better than to be a hero, we were taught to determine and assess whether it was even possible to run, or whether it's best to hide and wait like a sitting duck, or if it was worth it to try to fight. Fast forward again. I'm in the 8th grade in my law studies class, and we have a school-wide lockdown. A code yellow, they called it. Armed police officers were patrolling the hallways, making sure all classrooms were secure. My father, as I'm sure most parents did, texted me as soon as the news of the lockdown spread on social media. Parents always live under that assumption that it would not happen to my kid, never my kid. Yet there it was. The reality of the risk. Having to contact your child when they're locked down in their school due to a shooter situation. I learned later that the proximity of the danger was only a 10 minutes walk away. Luckily, I learned even later that this was a falsely reported danger, but the school and the authorities rightfully took precaution. But now let's look at our present. Less than a month ago, a shooting occurred at Florida State University, a university of which we know many alum are currently attending students, a university of which there are students who have already lived through Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And now this is our reality: active shooter drills, zero tolerance for threats, and a constant vigilance. So one has to ask, what causes these issues? Why is it more prevalent today than it was 15 years ago? There's an amalgamation of reasons, some more obvious than others, and some more uncommon. Initially, we as a society decided it best to attribute these acts to terrorism or religious fundamentalism, because it was important to us to attribute these acts to some pinpointed enemy. Then, as the religious fundamentalist narrative began to lose support, we changed our opinion, and we found that the new cause of school shootings was clearly mental health. It simply had to be mental illness. After all, it was no surprise that nearly a quarter of school shooters were said to have some kind of mental disorder, typically depression, and we said that these mental illnesses had caused these episodes of violence. So suddenly, we as a society had to be mindful of students and young adults with mental disorders, but not because we cared about their well-being and their health, no. Because now we're worried about our safety, because we're the ones that are saying that these mental illnesses are triggering these violent acts. Now, there's little to no doubt that mental health issues do contribute to the problem of school shootings. However, by simply focusing on disorders like depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety, we still ignore a fundamental aspect of the problem, often a root cause of the issue because it's uncomfortable for us to acknowledge and address. Quite often, the genesis is that despite programs to prevent harassment and bullying, we ostracize people who are different, who have difficulty fitting in with their environment. When there are signs of possible issues with somebody, the tendency is to deliberately exclude them or even harass them. And of course, with social media, the harassment can be constant and severe. In 2020 and 2021, the internet took on the trend of POV videos, a satiric form of storytelling. Most of them included some iteration of the quiet kid stereotype, and most of them, at some point in the 10 to 15 second video, he would take up arms and start a school shooting, sparing the viewer, thanking them for lending a pencil, saying that I'll never forget your kindness. There were videos with sad songs about the class clown sharing with his class his struggles with depression and admitting that he thinks of shooting up the school all of the time. These were posted on the internet. And we laughed at them. We turned a failure of our society into an internet trend to mock it. Because again, we live with the same rationale that would never happen to us. And clearly, there didn't seem to be an appetite to truly analyze the situation and take responsibility for the ways in which we contribute to the problem. Though it may not be a popular opinion, when one analyzes the data, you'll find that the biggest contributor to school shootings is in fact not mental health, but it is indeed bullying. A 2004 study conducted by the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Secret Service indicates that nearly 3/4 of school shooters were harassed or bullied at school. And while schools boast a no-tolerance policy regarding bullying, there's no way to truly regulate bullying, especially cyberbullying. So how effective can school policies really be in preventing these incidents? A study conducted by Columbia University indicates that only 5% of mass shootings, not school shootings specifically, are associated with severe mental illness. And though a much larger proportion of mass shootings, roughly 25%, are associated with non-psychotic, psychiatric, or neurological illnesses, typically depression, in most cases, these conditions are incidental. We blame these mental disorders, yet substance abuse accounts for 23% of mass shootings, but we don't attribute it to that. So clearly, what we're looking for here is a scapegoat, not a solution, as society's often done in the past, but we're looking at the real problem, which in this case is ourselves. As is the case with most issues in society, we are the collective problem. How we address dire situations like this is often defined by the phrase, too little, too late. As a society, we don't take sufficient preventative measures and use only reactive measures instead, which also fall short. We need to create a sense of unity against the common evil of not only gun violence, but of harassment, alienation, and bullying. Many say that against a gun, words are meaningless. And now no one is saying that the solution to gun violence is a pep talk. But we need to de-escalate the situation before it begins to rise. We have to avoid getting to that point in the first place by supporting those around us who may be struggling. And yes, that includes people with mental health issues, but with everybody in general struggling with their day-to-day, feeling ostracized and discarded. Rather than excluding and belittling them, it is our job as a society to be taking care of one another. And that forces us to look at our own behavior, individually and collectively, and think of whether or not our actions foster and create a sense of unity and inclusivity and support and understanding, or whether they further endanger ourselves and others. Tragedies like school shootings, unfortunately, will continue to occur, and that is unavoidable. School shootings are undeniably a tall task to address with many things within them to address. But like with any large task, you need to take small but meaningful steps to accomplish it over time. And there's the silver lining. With those small individual steps, supporting each other, choosing to refrain from harassment, and instead foster a sense of inclusivity and unity. With those small individual steps, we can proactively replace the thoughts and prayers that we share after a tragedy with kindness and understanding well before those thoughts begin to form. It starts with you. It starts with us. All of us. Thank you.